How's everybody's day going? Are you super excited to do this stress management presentation? I am super excited to be talking about it with you folks today. So to give you a little bit of introduction of who I am and why I'm presenting this to you and not somebody else, my name is Dr. Cody Walls, and I'm one of the staff psychologists at the Counseling Center. And one of my many roles, in addition to providing therapy to individuals, groups, and couples, is also to run the stress management program. So sort of my role right now is to revitalize and redevelop the program, because it went for a while without anybody kind of being involved in it. And so they kind of tapped me for this cat chat, and I'm pretty excited about it. So I hope to make it a little interactive in the sense that I invite you, since you are my physical audience, to answer some questions if you feel comfortable. And I have a mic, so to be consistent with those folks who are accessing Zoom today or the folks that access it at a later date, that they can hear your questions and get those answers. Does that sound okay for everybody? Okay. So before I do start, though, what kind of drew you all to this presentation? Yes, I'm going to have you turn on the mic because it might feedback. Oh, yeah, right?
Speak pretty loud.
It's okay. They won't be able to pick it up. So if you can just flip it on and answer the question.
Repeat the question again.
Why you decided to come to this cat chat?
I decided to come to this cat chat because I needed to come to an observation for class, and I figure stress management would be something that I'd be interested in, just because it's something that everybody goes through, and I actually don't know a time when I'm not stressing about anything, so.
That's fair. Great. Thank you for being the guinea pig and jumping right out there and saying it. Anybody else want to share why you came today? Yeah, right? Yes, I'm going to pass it over to him. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So I'm currently a construction science and management student, and one of my professors that I look up to, he told us that the best thing that we can do for ourselves is take stress management courses, either a course or a training session, just because that in our work, once we get out into our career field, it's very, very stressful.
Sure.
That's something you got to be able to manage. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Good deal. Anybody else? Yeah? Thank you.
I came here today because I know that my semester is going to be getting very busy soon.
Oh, sure.
With not just classes, but with extracurricular activities that I'm involved in. And I'm actually going to be working as part of the wardrobe crew on a theater show that's coming up. So I'm going to have 2 or 3 weeks where I'm going to only be open for about 2 days, and plus midterms are coming up, so I figured this would probably be a good course to attend.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you're here and being mindful of the time. I won't force anybody else to answer the question. Can you actually turn that off and then hand it back to me? Thank you. So, a little bit of a plan for the next few minutes. So understand the nature of stress and how our bodies react to it. Discuss health behaviors to help decrease our stress, and then also identify ways in which we can engage in our own self-care to manage that stress. Any questions or concerns? All right. So, how would you define stress? And I'll just repeat the answer. Psychological thing, okay? Others? Personal pressure to succeed, good. Other thoughts? All right. So stress, to give you a textbook definition, is a reaction to physical or mental demands. We don't often think about things like athletic engagements as physical, or as stress, excuse me, but it is a way of sort of training our bodies to start to engage in things differently. Stress can be caused by both positive and negative life events. Just a show of hands, and I can count them off. How many of you have ever heard of somebody getting married? Everybody in the room. Awesome. So that is both, can be really positive and also negative at times with the amount of stress that you have to deal with. While some stress is beneficial, an abundance of it can be really harmful for our systems, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those hormones that course through our bodies that help influence our reactions to distress and stressful events. Even though they can be motivating, long-term effects of those can be really harmful. It can also be a way to energize ourselves and accomplish important tasks. And we'll talk about a stress curve in a few minutes, to identify sort of where that sweet spot is that we want to engage in stressful activities, but not to the point where we're feeling overwhelmed and incapable of achieving our goals. And one last thing is the best way to understand the stress cycle is a holistic approach, so the mind and body and environment aspects. So, nature of stress. Again, stress is perceived demand or threat, stressors, to our mind, body, spirit, or value system, or emotions, and it's associated with a reaction to those systems. And there's two types of stress that we can talk about. The first is eustress, and this is the term we use to describe positive stress. This is the type of stress that helps us act, to take on challenging tasks, and feels like we're competent and capable of engaging in those things. Now, the type of stress I imagine you all were expecting to focus on is this aspect of distress. And this could be quote-unquote termed bad stress. This is the stress that feels really harmful to us and can at times paralyze us from being able to accomplish the things that we want to do. So too much stress ineffectively cope with over a period of time becomes problematic. Any questions about these aspects before we move forward? Okay. So as I mentioned, there's this stress curve. So as you can see, there's this left side of the curve where it's too little stress. We're underwhelmed, we don't really feel motivated or have any desire to really engage in a project or a task at hand. Then as we sort of move up towards the curve, we talk about optimum stress. And it is kind of yellowy orange because it is in a way kind of a warning system. We don't want to hang out in this area for too long because we want to have a reprieve. But this does tend to be where we perform the most effectively. Then if you have too much stress, you start to become exhausted. Burnout is pretty imminent at times unless you start to intervene quickly and make some changes with how things are going. And then you do have the burnout aspect where anxiety, panic, and anger are all typical reactions to these stressors. And then you have the potential for a breakdown. And generally what that means is your body then sends your mind and your maybe even social interaction signals where it's like, we just need to shut down because we can't handle this anymore. You might not be surprised to experience these types of things if you have lots of responsibilities to deal with at one time. So not too long ago, I was a graduate student. And some of the parts of our experience and training is that we have to do a clinical internship for a year. And it just so happened that the semester that I was applying for the internship sites, which is basically like you're applying for 15 jobs. I was also teaching 2 classes, taking 12 hours of coursework, and also working on my dissertation, which is, I'm sure you all can imagine what a dissertation is. So I spent a lot of time in the too much stress area, and it was a challenge sometimes to make space for myself to be able to function most effectively and optimally. So can any of you think of a time where you were functioning in that optimum stress level? And I'll repeat the answers. Yes. Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure, but that optimum stress, it sounds like when you do have some responsibilities to engage in, like you said, work and class and extracurricular activities, like you still feel like performing well and that you're not feeling overwhelmed at any point, but that can be tricky sometimes. What about, have you ever taken a class that you were really interested in for your major that you knew was going to be challenging, but you were really excited about the material? That could be an example of sort of that optimum stress. You are about to step past the threshold of your current knowledge, but you might feel really motivated and excited to engage in that. So, any questions about the stress curve before we move on? Okay. So, we'll talk about the nature of stress, and there are generally 2 categories that we're going to look at. So, we'll focus on stress outside of ourselves and then stress inside of ourselves. So as I'm sure you can imagine, the things outside of ourselves are typically things that we don't have a lot of direct control over all the time, and certainly don't exist within us. So the physical environment, noise, the heat or cold, we are currently under a tornado watch, so we cannot control that, and that is certainly environmental and can be stressful. Social interactions, if there's aggressiveness or disagreements that we are not prepared for or not comfortable with, that can feel sometimes really challenging. Organizational things we don't have control over. We don't get to set the syllabus or the task list for responsibilities. And then also major life events that, again, can be both positive and distressing at times. So starting college, getting married, having a baby, getting ill, or even having a promotion with a new job, because those are new responsibilities that you have to deal with. The stress from inside ourselves, and this kind of makes me think back to the example that you offered with your field of study, and that when you get out and work in the real world, remind me what program it is? Construction science. There's going to be a certain level of expectation. And I would imagine if you were all here today, and you're all currently enrolled in school, that you want to perform well, and that is a pressure and stress that we can put on ourselves. That could both be helpful and then also go too far. Wanting to feel in control of a situation, that's sometimes the most challenging aspect of dealing with stress, because we feel like if we have more control, somehow we'll be less stressed, and that ends up working against us in a lot of ways. Attitude or outlook on a situation, and then personal choices such as alcohol and drugs, our diet, working overtime, or taking time to relax. So, does that all make sense? Would you want to add anything to those, either things that maybe specifically stress you out, that are environmental or inside of you? No? All right. So let's talk a little bit about the physiological response that our body has. How many of you are familiar with the fight or flight freeze response? Good. So quite a few people. We're going to talk a little bit about that for those of you who didn't raise your hand. So the fight, flight, or freeze response is our body's physiological arousal to survive a threat. So one of the previous presentations had an image of a caveman and a bear. And, you know, typically you think about the fight response is that you're going to turn and attack the threat so that you can survive. And the flight response is you have this activation to run away. The freeze response that is not always as detailed in sort of popular culture is our body and any sort of animal with a functioning brain's reaction to, I don't know how to get out of this situation, so I'm going to prepare to die. So, to not put it too bluntly, I might add. But this idea where you can't hit that Rolodex of how do I survive this situation, I cannot fight this situation, you just kind of shut down. And that is not always mean that you die, but it can be certainly a reaction to this process. So if you think about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, and I am going to read a little bit off the sheet, full disclosure. So the sympathetic nervous system is a branch of our central nervous system that releases epinephrine, which is also known as adrenaline, norepinephrine, which is noradrenaline, and cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And too much cortisol in our system for too long actually starts to deteriorate our organs and break down the soft tissues in our bodies. So this prepares our bodies for rapid metabolic change and physical movement. Symptoms typically include breathing, heart rate increases, our blood pressure increases, and we experience a lot of muscle tension. Anybody compete athletically for anything at any time? Some folks. When you get ready for a match or a race or a competition, that typically is where you can experience this in a safe way. It's like you get really excited, you have a lot of energy in this jolt, preparing you to engage in that task at hand. The parasympathetic nervous system is a system in our body that counteracts the sympathetic nervous system. And this is sort of what you want to tap into with stress management techniques. So it actually calms our body by releasing a set of hormones called acetylcholine, and in order to calm our system so it sort of balances back out the process. They're both partially active at all times, but you can't have both of them running at full speed at the same time. Does that make sense? So you're either aroused with distress and that fight or flight or freeze response is engaged, or you're in this calm state where you're kind of balancing it out, but they're always sort of like this. So some aspects that can cause these are non-physical threats. As I mentioned, the caveman and the bear, we don't often have saber-toothed tigers chasing us around campus now. But we can sort of create these threatening experiences in our own minds that can be really difficult to manage. Like if you start to perceive your professor as a threat, or even your romantic partner as a potential threat because you fear losing that relationship, that can activate our stress response. And also, there's an accumulation factor with stress. And on average, studies have shown that we, in our everyday lives, experience anywhere between 50 and 200 moderately fight or flight response engaging experiences. So anytime you feel like a little jolt of your heart rate, that could be an example of your body somehow engaging in that fight or flight response. So, does that feel clear? Does anybody have questions about that? No? Okay. Before I give that away, what are some symptoms you can imagine that you might experience from stress? Anybody? Anybody? All right, I'm going to have you turn it on again. Thank you. Symptoms of stress.
Wait, do you want me to list like all the ones I can think
No,
of?
just a couple that you can think of. Give
Well,
other folks an opportunity.
one that I can think of that comes to my mind is I get like a little sweaty, sweaty
yeah.
palms from stress, and like in my head, I kind of just feel a little frustrated.
Good. Others? You can pass it over to her.
Not sleeping well or not sleeping enough.
Good. So that's a symptom. Awesome. Others' thoughts? Other times you know you're stressed? Thank you.
I find that when I get stressed, I tend to get headaches, and I will also experience an increased level of fatigue.
Sure. Yeah. Good. Anybody else? One more? Can we get one more? All right. Thank you.
Sometimes I notice that like my heart rate speeds up or that I stop breathing and I'm like, I should take a deep breath.
Yes. Right. Very good. So if you can actually turn that off because they interfere with each other sometimes. Thank you. All right. So you hit on a lot of the big ones. So symptoms of stress. There are physical symptoms, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral. So physical symptoms, upset stomach, headaches, sweating. Also, the physiological response of increased heart rate, sometimes decreased respiration if we're holding our breath for some reason and we're not sure why, but also increased breathing to try to keep up with that system. Emotional aspects of symptoms of stress, and this is one that we're not always easy to sort of tune into. So if we find ourselves having a short temper with folks and things that didn't used to make us angry or frustrated, but suddenly are for some inexplicable reason, it could be because we're stressed. Feeling sad or anxious, and also just general moodiness. Cognitive symptoms include poor concentration, worry, and indecisiveness. And this actually is where, with academics, we see the greatest impact, because when you can't remember things as efficiently as you had if you were less stressed, you're probably not going to do well on assessment. So if you need to take an exam, or you need to write a paper or an assignment and you have trouble recalling information effectively, it could have negative impacts for you in the long run. Also behavioral components. So lots of times people sort of turn to different types of coping to manage stress. So increased substance use. If you find yourself needing more and more alcohol to relax, it could be because you've developed a tolerance. It could also be because you feel like it's not cutting through the stress you're experiencing. Relationship conflicts. And even changes in eating. So let's talk about some healthy behaviors and ways to fight stress to the best of our abilities. So easy peasy, you can probably tell from the foods, they're healthier in nature. You're not seeing like a bag of French fries up there, though that might be a comfort food we turn to at times. So taking care of yourself helps you prevent and manage stress. And sometimes that means we do need to tune into our physical bodies in order to do that. So if you think about food as fuel, if we're putting junk fuel in our system, we're not going to perform as effectively as we would otherwise. So eating healthy food is important. Getting regular exercise is really valuable, and there's been lots and lots of studies to show that at least 20 minutes of like aerobic exercise, so getting your heart rate up, getting your respiration to increase, that has an enormous amount of preventative aspects and can also work as an antidepressant. So if any of you folks know or you yourselves struggle with some depressive-like symptoms, then getting out and moving for at least 20 minutes can be really helpful. Now, if you are not physically active now and you want to work towards 20 minutes, then start off with 5. Or even between classes, walking briskly between buildings can also be a way to build up that endurance to reach the 20 minutes. Making time for fun might seem obvious, but when we feel stressed, we feel like we have to tackle problems in the moment in order to get past them to have fun. But sometimes hitting pause on that stressful event and actually making time to enjoy yourself can help. Talk to people about what's bothering you. I obviously am from the counseling center, so I have some bias on what the value I find in talking to people about things, but also just acknowledging to another person is like, hey, you know, I'm feeling really stressed out right now, and I've got this, this, and this, and I just need you to tell me that it's going to be okay. And that can make a world of difference at times. Practice mindfulness, and in short, mindfulness is just being in the moment. So don't worry about what could happen or what is coming, or worrying about what happened before and what you should have done differently. Just think about what is happening right now. So right now, you were all sitting in this lecture hall, listening to me talk to you about thinking about what's going on right now. That's what's happening. And that can actually engage your system in a way that you're not sort of just time traveling, which can increase stress. Limit junk foods, caffeine, and alcohol, and sleep. So think twice before pulling an all-nighter. We had somebody bring up the changes in sleep, which we're going to talk about now in laborious detail. After time management, sorry. I was prepared for this. So another way to prevent and manage stress is to manage your time. How many of you have a calendar that you rely on time? So most of you. Yeah, this is a good thing. When you know what's coming up, you can better prepare for it. So sometimes you don't need, if an assignment is due on Friday and it's only Monday, but you've got this larger assignment that maybe is due next Monday, you can sort of meter your time out effectively to get them both done. So what are some of your biggest time wasters? Microphone again. Yeah, all right. So first you, I turned it on, and then you.
I'd have to say probably my biggest time waster is prioritizing the things that I need to get done. So I might sit there, you know, because my major, it's all about being efficient. So I might sit there for like maybe 10, 15 minutes figuring out what I need to do and which is more important instead of actually just sitting down and getting it done.
Sure.
That's one thing I've tried to been working on lately. So
Awesome. Yeah, making lists ends up sometimes taking more time than it would to just do one task.
I would say definitely like my phone or just electronics in general, just TV. You know, you can just get lost on YouTube for 30 minutes to an hour. You're like, oh
my
crap.
gosh. And even that's a conservative amount, right? You could just all night. So good. Anybody else want to share their time wasters who maybe haven't shared anything? You don't have to. No? All right. I'll take it back. Thank you. So big time wasters. I think for me, time wasters are pretty consistent with screen time and making to-do lists. So I just try to have something on the side of my computer where I just write it down quickly and move on to the next thing. And actually, screen time will come into play when we talk a little bit about sleep habits. So obviously, you all can read Your Competent People, be aware of upcoming engagements, incorporate fun activities into your calendar. With regard to sleep, on average, it is recommended that people try to get between 7 and 9 hours of sleep. Now, that varies depending on what your body needs at the time. So maybe on a normal week where you're feeling great and things are going well, you might only need 7 hours of sleep. But if you catch an illness or you're not feeling well or you are experiencing some stress, you may have an increased need for sleep. So generally, you can know what you need. In terms of exercise, while it is important for stress management, if you're doing a lot of aerobic exercises, you want to try to do that 5 to 6 hours before you would go to bed. Any guesses why? Increased heart rate, good. So you're sort of artificially or even purposely activating that stress response in a good way, but you want to have time to kind of cool down and relax effectively. Avoid caffeine. can last up to 8 hours, anything you have. I have been guilty many times of having caffeine at like 8 o'clock at night because I needed to get something done, and then paying for it at 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm laying there unable to go to sleep. So relaxing before bed is also really important, and some ways to do that are to like have a hot bath or a hot shower, because there's actually, it's been shown that if you take a warm shower or warm bath, it lowers your core body temperature. So it's actually, you're telling your body it's time to prepare to rest. So it can be really effective. Stick to a sleep schedule. How many of you will binge sleep over the weekend? So maybe you normally have to get up at like 8 or 9, but on a weekend you're up at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Yes. So that is actually counterproductive to you engaging in a healthy sleep schedule. And that can impact your sleep on Sunday night when you need to go to bed and get up for the class on Monday. And then also, again, affecting good quality sleep. Sleep environment is really valuable to consider. So blocking out unwanted noise. I realize if you live in a dorm or you have roommates, that can be challenging because you don't have control over that. But if you do find that you're disturbed frequently throughout the night, or even have trouble falling asleep because you don't know when something or someone is going to come into the room or the house, earplugs and noisemakers work really effectively. Having a cooler room is nice. It is not always cost effective in the summertime, but when we're hot, we get uncomfortable when we're trying to sleep, and there has been some evidence to show that when we sleep in a room that's too warm, if we are vulnerable to panic attacks, you can actually induce a panic attack in the middle of the night by being too warm when you sleep, because your body's telling you something's not right, we need to freak out, and then you wake up having a panic attack, and it maybe doesn't make sense, but that can be a contributing factor. Now, the room you sleep in, you want it to be bright during the day, even if you maybe don't spend a lot of time in there, and you want it to be as dark as possible at night. TV, computer, and homework steal your sleep. So blue light impacts sleep quality. And the reason for that is, if you think about, if we had no artificial light, and we were just going through every day without the room lights or anything like that, we would have a natural sort of color progression. So it would start out red, kind of golden in the morning, it would go blue, and it'd be bright, and then blue, and then it'd go back to those redder shades. When you look at a phone or a computer screen all day, you're constantly being sent that blue light signal. So that's artificially telling you, you need to be awake, you need to be energized, because it's supposed to be the way our system is working. There are lots of settings, particularly on like iPhone product or Apple products, where you can set it so it will take a pink-red tinge as the day goes through its cycle. I don't know if it's phone specific or if it's the OS software that allows you to do that, but it is an option to consider exploring. More about sleep, as I said, laboriously so. Sleep deprivation, some ways to know if you might be deprived of sleep, which is not just I'm generally tired all the time, because that could be other underlying conditions that you might want to see a medical or mental health provider about. So if you're relying on the snooze button, and typically for someone who has a really sort of consistent and quote-unquote healthy sleep cycle, they'd wake up at around the same time every day, and they don't need an alarm to do that. If you find you're having a hard time getting up in the morning, if you're really feeling sluggish in the afternoon, so that 5-hour energy drinks, any sort of caffeinated beverages like that, we would like to get to a point where you didn't need to use those to get through the day. If you find yourself being sleepy in class, falling asleep, drowsy while you're driving, which is also unsafe, we want you to be safe. If you fall asleep within 5 minutes of going to bed, so you're just so exhausted that as soon as your head hits the pillow, you're out, which there's some debate about that, because you do want to fall asleep quickly, because that means you used your day well, but also you don't want to fall asleep so quickly because you're exhausted. And then also, if you're falling asleep while you're doing relaxing things. Anybody experience anything like these? I experienced these. I don't know how many times I fell asleep watching TV in grad school. It's just like, even if it's really interesting, didn't matter, couldn't keep me awake. This is one area too, and I talk about, I mean, obviously stress management is my area of interest and competency, but I still struggle with these types of things too. So it is always a growth process, and recognizing them is sometimes the hardest parts. As I'm sure you can imagine with your own experiences, effects of sleep deprivation include fatigue and lethargy. Low motivation, reduced creativity, reduced immunity. How many of you after finals week get ill? or know people who do. Yes, that can sometimes be a result of that. Poor concentration and memory, and then impaired motor skills. So not being able to move as easily as we thought we would. So, any questions or anything you would want to add to sleep as being good? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about self-care. And so some self-care ideas, and these are just ideas that I have come up with, but I would love to hear some of yours, either what you do and what you find effective or what you've heard other people do and you might want to try out. So getting some sunlight, natural light, is really important. It helps with vitamin D, and particularly for biological women, it helps with vitamin D and calcium absorption, so we actually can keep our bones stronger if we get natural sunlight. Writing, drawing, or painting, engaging those creative aspects that we aren't always able to, watching a funny movie, 10-minute walk, listening to upbeat music, practicing gratitude. So when we're kids and it's around Thanksgiving season, we can reflect on the things I'm thankful for. But sometimes just sitting down and thinking, what am I thankful for right now? And jotting down 2 or 3 things can help sort of shift a perspective and maybe focus on things that are positive in your life rather than those more challenging aspects. Taking another hot bath. I didn't realize how many times that was referenced. I apologize for that. Engaging in hobbies. So those are some things. What have you folks tried before or would you want to try out? You get to turn on the mic again, and then we'll get it to you. Thank you. Oh.
My go-to self-care thing is probably going to the rec.
Yeah?
And playing basketball or lifting.
Yeah, that's really positive. Probably should integrate that into my own life, but good. All right, looks like you had one.
I'm a big fan of baths, so I think that's great that that's
Okay,
up there
good.
that many times. I personally find that doing yoga helps a lot, and there's a lot of free videos on YouTube, so you don't have to go to an expensive class.
Very nice. Yeah, thank you.
So I was in the Peace Corps and had really high stress levels on a regular basis. And one thing that we did a lot was end a sentence with "today is a good day." So like if you're having a bad day and you say "today is a good day" at the end of every sentence, then you start to have a better day.
That's pretty exciting. Yeah.
I have tried a lot of what is on that list myself, and they always do help to some extent. But sometimes I'm in a situation where those actually aren't available,
Sure.
like when I'm in the middle of a test for class. You know, I can't just go and take a 10-minute walk or whatever.
enough.
So, but in those situations, though, sometimes I just have to stop for 10 or 15 seconds and just breathe.
Yes.
And just try to calm down.
Yes, very good. Any other thoughts you want to add? No? All right. Thank you so much. So, and I think this kind of fits on the what you had shared about the Peace Corps, and that like ending every sentence with "today is a good day." So part of the thing with stress management that's really important and why it can become manageable is that you want to make some small changes. Like you're not, after this presentation, you're not going to be able to just go out and manage your stress like 100% perfectly and never experience anything negative. But if you can make some small changes after today, that maybe will create an environment for you to experience less stress later or even more effectively manage it at another time, that could be awesome. So small changes. I really like that diagram because if any of you know anything about counseling theory, one of the things is solution focused, where you want to identify what the issue is and figure out how you can effectively manage it or resolve the issue in a pretty quick amount of time so that you can go on and live your life. Got a couple more slides. One thing that I think we often forget about as we sort of enter the adult world is what types of things we really enjoy doing. Because we turn 18 or we graduate high school and suddenly we have to become an adult. And that comes with its own sort of assumptions and expectations on us. And we forget those things that we really used to like doing. So what are some things that you liked to do when you were a kid? And I'll just repeat them. Ride your bike. Do you have a bike here? Yeah? Others? Play sports, yes. You're clearly doing that still. Playing an instrument, awesome. What did you like to play? Piano, nice. Other thoughts? Reading? Yes, reading was very, very nice. And then at bedtime, before bedtime is a really good time to integrate that too. Well, as long as it's not too exciting, but. Any other thoughts? What else do you like to do as a kid? Getting out of the house for a while, right? I had a lot of animals growing up, like household animals, so I always like to play with my dog or run around with my cats and just enjoy the time. So getting out, engaging in those types of things can be really fun. And kind of going back to this, the part, and why it's such a tragedy now in our society where education has become teaching to the test, we take away recess. And recess is really so important for our development as human beings because it burns off all that stressful energy, and it also can help in developing pretty effective cognitive structures by engaging in that system. So, another aspect is the giving portion. Sometimes it's hard to, when we're sort of trapped in our own distress, to think about how reaching out to other people to give them something might be helpful, but there's lots of research on specifically depression. When you do things for others, it actually lifts your mood. And, you know, I would like to believe generally we're nice people. That may not be true for everybody we interact with. But when you do something kind for someone else and they are able to accept it and it's really meaningful to them, then that can actually give you a boost of endorphins, and endorphins make you happy. So giving is really valuable. That actually went way faster than I expected. So any questions or anything that you would want to add? Because I could do one more activity that is a breathing activity if you want to do that. And also, if the people on the chat have comments, then we can do that. I hope it's not going to say we couldn't hear you the whole time. Oh, yay, good, okay. So, Libby and Lauren, if you have questions too, you can type it in the chat and I'll read those off. So, any questions? Yes. Sure.
And that deadline's never moving. Your target's always moving. So.
Sure, that's a good question. So the question was, what do I suggest when the target is always moving because you're an architecture student and you constantly coming up with ideas and how you can implement things, but if a professor's unhappy with it, the deadline doesn't move, but what you have to do changes quickly. Did I get that all? Yeah. Okay, good, thanks. So my recommendation is to try to pull back from this situation, because going back to the idea of control and effectively engaging in the stress management components where you can. So you can't change the fact that your professor is going to have critiques for you, and they're always going to have a different expectation, and the mark is always moving. But what you can change is maybe how you approach the subject or the topic. So taking a couple deep breaths before you start to redesign, or even one of the things that we talked about was the mindfulness component. So being able to engage in the project in the moment rather than worrying about, well, are they going to like this? Am I going to need to change this? What's this going to look like? Trying to anticipate the next thing takes away from the work you're able to do in that time. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? I mean, I wish I could here's exactly what you need to do with everything. And I'll say this, not to disparage other majors, but architecture is one of the most stressful majors at a university because of the demand that's put on the students. And actually, we're trying to form a really strong relationship with the architecture department for that very reason. So, not that anybody else is not hard enough. I don't want that to come across, but because it's plenty hard. So, other questions? Yes? That is a great question. So what if your body is stuck in the fight or flight mode? So one of the key features is that you want to access that parasympathetic system, which is the one that will offset the sympathetic nervous system, which is where you're activated. You can do that in a variety of ways, and some of the things that we outlined are effective, but a big one actually is breathing. So, and there's different types of breathing techniques that you can do. Deep breathing is helpful, and typically you can do a counting system with deep breathing. So you would breathe in for 6 and you breathe out for 6, and you try to have that natural flow of breathing. But then there's also a technique that's called 4-7-8 breathing, and that's what we use most often when we're dealing with clients, well, when I'm dealing with clients who have anxiety. So do you all want to try that out? I can totally guide you in it. So I don't know why I said totally. That really felt like I was trying to legitimize my conversation with you all. So like I said, it's a 4-7-8 breath. And there is actually a specific place you have to put your tongue. So you don't have to like open your mouth and show me. But you all should have ridges behind your teeth on the top. Can you feel that if you run your tongue across the top of your mouth? Okay, so if you put the tip of your tongue on that part of your mouth, and you kind of hold it there. So you're going to breathe in for a count of 4, and you're going to hold it for a count of 7. Now breathe out for 8 through your mouth, slowly. Let's do that again. So tongue on the roof of your mouth, breathe in for 4, hold it, and breathe out through your mouth slowly. So that's 2 rounds. If you do that 4 rounds 2 times a day, you will experience a significant decrease in your general anxiety about things. Like scientifically evidenced that just doing that alone can significantly decrease. Because think about what we're doing. If our fight or flight response is engaged and our heart rate is increased, our respiration is increased, we are overriding that system by taking deep breaths in that way and holding it. Because when you take a breath in, your heart rate increases, and when you take a breath out, your heart rate decreases. So you're actually telling your body that you're spending more time with, that you're decreasing your heart rate in that way. And if you have concerns or questions about it, I can give you the references, so you know I'm not just telling you this for fun and making you do things in here because I didn't have any other type of activities. Any other questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Right, so tips to sort of recognize before you're at that crash point of how you're feeling stressed. Well, my first recommendation would be think back to the last time you were really, really so stressed out and you were on the verge of a breakdown. And then think back to the things that were happening before that to kind of slow down that process and maybe find things that you could pick out that's like, oh, well, this added to the accumulated stress, and then this added to it. And this was where I maybe could have managed it or done something differently, but instead I did something that added to it. Because I think the hardest thing with dealing with stress is recognizing those things that cause us stress. And this is sometimes where another person's conversation could come in handy. So if you're trying to figure this out and you want to talk it through with somebody else, you can sort of list the things out that you think were pretty stressful at that time. Because it's usually not that last thing that caused all that stress. It's the old idiom like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's an accumulation process. Now, with that information, you can engage in some of these things that we talked about where you are slowing down, where you're taking time to relax and to sort of calm your system effectively to help manage that next stressor, even if it's just acknowledging that former one has not gone away yet. So, is that helpful? Okay, all right. And did you raise your hand? Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. So I'm going to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. So what do I have suggestions on when you're trying to make changes to manage stress, but you kind of fall back into those things you're trying to change? Okay. It is sort of a cop-out to say keep trying, but also to see if there's a way you can compromise to things. Because caffeine, like other substances like alcohol, marijuana, nicotine, and other like hard drugs that we would think of, we can build up a tolerance in our system. So what gave us energy in like a 6-ounce cup of coffee, we might need 24 ounces to get the same effect. So going cold turkey, so to speak, from caffeine it can shock our system a lot. So if you can somehow balance and maybe only have caffeine up until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or and then cutting back from there until you feel like you're in a place where you could go without having any caffeine or coffee, then that might be an easier way to balance it. So you can still achieve your goal at one point, but still sort of not feel like you're like falling off the wagon or being ineffective in some way. Does that help? Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? Yes. Oh, naps effective for reducing stress. That is a great question and so controversial too. One, yes, naps are effective because one, they can be rejuvenating, but two, they can also be a really good avoidance tactic. Because if you're asleep, you don't really have to deal with anything that's going on. Where I say naps become problematic is when you're sleeping or when you're napping because you're not getting enough sleep at night. Because naps can significantly impact our sleep cycle. There's been some new evidence to show that there's a difference between what people call a power nap, which is like 20 to 30 minute nap to sort of recharge yourself, versus a rejuvenating nap, which is typically about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes. So the effects of both of the naps can last for up to 3 hours beyond when you took it, but you also want to make sure you're not napping at like 6 o'clock at night and that type of thing. So I'm a big nap person, but I also do try to be mindful of like, am I trying to go to sleep because I'm trying to avoid something? And is this something that I need to just try to hold out for and go to bed at a reasonable hour and do some things to help relax me before I go to bed so I can fall asleep? So I realized I was like, I'm not going to answer your question at all. It depends. But it depends. So, fair question. Did I see another hand? Yeah.
I have experienced somebody else about, but sometimes it's difficult.
Sure.
Because she's going to want to drive.
Sure, yeah. That is a good question. So the question was, acknowledging that it is helpful to talk to people, how do you decide who to talk to about stressful situations and issues? And I think kind of going back to the nap answer, it depends, because generally the people that we're going to share information with, we know to some degree or another. And there may be some people who we are safer in the sense that they're not going to do something that feels like an overreaction to our stress. And it can also be helpful to communicate our goal with sharing that information. So, you know, if you are not trying to have somebody fix a problem and you really just need somebody to listen to what's going on with you right now, it's okay to like give yourself permission to tell them that, to look at that person or talk to them over the phone and say, I don't need you to fix anything. I don't need you to tell me what to do. I just need you to listen. And again, maybe just tell me everything's going to be okay. And also, you know, it can be easy to feel like a burden at times when we have people we're trying to talk to about our concerns. So it's okay to check in with that person. Now, generally, people are really nice, and they're not going to look at you and say, yeah, you're being a burden. I'm tired of hearing about your problems. Now, some people do that. But it can also be a benefit to find multiple people to share concerns with. So you're kind of like, you're spreading out your concerns with different people so you don't feel like you have one person who's holding all of that information. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. Good deal. So I think we're actually at about 10 till. So yeah, actually we're at 10 till. So Any other last thoughts, questions, concerns? If you are interested in the next Cat Chat, which is at the same time next week, it's going to be a training on at-risk LGBTQ students. So if you have an interest in coming to that, or you think somebody else might, you can have them just come here and do the same thing. So thanks for attending.